In Lab 2, you're asked to create a simple app that has at least one input activity and output activity and takes at least one input. And so I'm going to create an Ohm's law calculator that calculates the amp draw given voltage and resistance and also calculates wattage. This is the kind of thing that I use in my hardware class. So I'm going to start a new Android Studio project and call the application Ohm's Law Calculator. And I'll leave the domain name the same, and instead of having a quote inside of the project name, I'm going to get rid of that. And we'll use the same default as before, API level 10. Start with a blank activity. So I'm going to have two activities, an input activity where the user enters data and an output activity where the results are shown. So I'm going to name my main activity input activity and finish. Close the tip of the day. So I can start in a bunch of different places, but where I'm going to start is laying out my input activity window. And so I'm going to go to, actually I'm already here, so I'm just going to go to the text view. Now, this next part is optional, but I'm going to do a little design here. So what I actually want to do is center the input box on my screen. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to have two linear layouts, one nested inside of the other. And the width of the inner layout is going to be wrap content, so it's going to be exactly as big as is required to hold the stuff on the inside. And then I'm going to put all of my stuff inside of this inner linear layout. And then to make everything in here centered on the screen, I'm going to add gravity to the outer layout. So the outer layout is going to fill the whole screen. The inner layout is going to fill a subset of that, and then it's going to be centered inside of the outer layout. And instead of having hello world here, what I'm going to do is have a header line. And let me define that. Okay. So what I need, I'll keep it simple to start with and then I'll make it look a little better. But what I need is two edit text boxes. And the first one is going to be wrap content, and the second, so layout width and layout height are both going to be wrap content. Now I want to set the default width here, and you do that using something called ems. And this is how many, so the width of this is going to be equal to this number of capital M characters side by side. So if I say, for example, 10 ems, that would make the size of this box big enough to hold the letter M 10 times in a row. And I'm also going to put a hint there so the user knows what to enter. So this one is going to be volts. And let's copy this and paste another one and call this one resistance in ohms. And then I want to sort of stack my elements. So the header line at the top, and then this underneath, and then this underneath. And then I'm going to have a button. And That's going to be wrap content as well. And then for this one, I'm going to set the button text to be calculate. And so let's see how we're doing so far. So I'm going to go to the design window and take a look. Now you'll notice that instead of stacking everything, it's going side to side. The way you fix that is by changing the orientation of the layout. So go back to the text view, and then in this layout I'm going to add orientation is vertical. And now if I go back and look at my design, everything is stacked. Doesn't look very nice yet, but we'll fix that. So let's see what it looks like on an actual device. Alright, so I have my header line, which is a little small. I have two input boxes with the right hints in them, and then I have a button. And I think I want to center this button, and I want to make this text bigger, and then I want to put some space after the header line and before the button. So let's go ahead and do that. So to make the header bigger, I want to add another property here, and I think it's text size. Yeah, text size like so. And then I should have a large text here somewhere. So here's a large text. ABC text size, large material. And then to get a space between the header text and these type boxes, I'm going to use a margin bottom. Margin bottom. And then I'm going to create a new dimension called, let's see, what do I want to call this? Layout space. Okay. And let's define layout space here. I'm going to go to my dimensions, and we'll make that. Let's make this 20 dp, so it's a little bigger than the default padding around the layout. Okay, so these two were okay. And then for the button, I'm going to add a margin top of layout space. And to center the button inside of this layout, I'm going to use layout gravity of center. So now let's see what we get. Okay, so that looks better, but I want these to be centered as well. So let me go ahead and center those. And actually what I'm going to do is inside of this linear layout here, I'm going to center all of the children horizontally. So I'm going to say gravity here is equal to center horizontal. And this will center all of the children of this layout. And that means that I don't actually need this anymore. So let's try that. Okay, good enough for now. So the next thing I want to do is I want to be able to get this data when the user types it in. Oh, I'm sorry, one more thing. So I want to only let the user type signed decimal numbers. So I'm going to make this input type for this column be either, actually be number signed and then I'm going to add in number decimal. So this is an OR right here. This means it's number sign or number decimal, which basically means it has to be both things, can be both things. And then I'm going to do the same thing for this input box as well. Next is there. So let's go ahead and try this. Alright, so I'm going to type some numbers, point, point, so now I can only type numbers there. I can't type letters. And then same thing here. So, and then doesn't do anything yet. So this is looking good. Now what I'm going to do next is, in order to hook this to my application, I need to give this an ID and this an ID, and then I have to give the button an on click so that something gets run when the user clicks the calculate button. So I'm going to say ID is equal to actually that. So let's call this one volt text, and let's do the same thing here. This is going to be resistance text, and then the button is going to have an on-click handler, which is going to call something called calculate. So I think I'm done here. Let me go to my Java code now. So when the application starts up, I don't have to do anything special. But when the user clicks on the calculate button, that's when I'm actually going to do the work. So let's go ahead and put this at the bottom. And it's got to be public void calculate. And then it's going to get passed in the view, which represents the button, which I'm not actually going to use for anything. And then Alt plus Enter to do the import. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start by getting the two input boxes, which are both text views. And one is going to be the volts text, which is equal to text view, and then find view by ID, r.id.volt text. And then I'm also going to have a text view for resistance text. Okay, and Alt plus Enter to resolve those. So now I have the boxes. I want to get the text out of the boxes. Let's make this volt instead of volts. And the way I do that is volt.get text. Yeah. So that gets the text. And then I want to take this text object and turn it into a string. And I use toString for that. It's actually resistance text. Why isn't this lighting up? Let me see. Oh, because I don't know. Oh, cannot have two resistance texts. There we go. Alright, so resistance text dot get text to string. Right, so now I have both of the user inputs, and now I'm going to create an intent so that I can start up my output activity. And then I'm going to start something called output activity, which I haven't created yet. So let's go ahead and create the output activity before we do the next part. And let me right click here and say new activity blank. And this one's going to be called output activity. And check all these. So the hierarchical parent is going to be the input activity from the project, so that you go back to the input screen. And I think everything else looks good. Alright, so now I have an output activity. Let's go back to our code for the input activity. Now this works. So I want to pass the value of volt string and the value of resistance string to my output activity and do the calculation in the output activity. So I'm going to put extra, and then I can put either the strings as they are, or I can put numeric values. And I think it actually makes more sense to put numeric values here. So put extra, and then I need 2 keys so that I can decide which is which. So let's create some keys here at the top. So these are going to be public, final, static, strings, and then the first one is going to be extra volts. com.example.mark.ohms law.volts. And then the second one is going to be resistance. Okay, so now I have 2 keys, and I could once again make these strings be anything, just make sure that they're actually unique across all my applications. So my first put extra, I'm going to put extra volts, and the value will be my... So now to turn this into a floating point number, you do this. Go to float class, dot, and then parse float, and then you put your string here. Don't worry if that looks odd to you. If you haven't worked in Java before, just treat it as boilerplate. And then I'm going to do the same thing with my resistance, which is going to be float.parseFloat and resistance string. Okay, so now I've set up my intent. Now I want to launch or start my output activity. And that's it for this. Now in my output activity, I want to catch those values from the other side, and then I want to display an output string. So let's go ahead and create the layout for this output string. And once again, I'm going to do the same thing I did last time. I'm going to have 2 linear layouts. With wrap content, and then I'm going to have 2 text views inside here. And these are going to both be wrap content. And instead of setting the text, I'm just going to create an ID for it. So this is the value that my program is going to write. Slash, let's see, what do I want to call this? So I'm going to have one for amps, and I'm going to have another one for watts. Okay. Let's check this out for now. We can tweak this later if we don't like how it looks. So when the activity gets started up, I'm going to start by getting my volts and ohms from the intent. So intent equals get intent, and Alt plus enter for the import. And then I'm going to have two floats. Get float extra, and I'm going to use the same key here as I did in input activity, but now I want to refer to extra volts inside of input activity because that's where it's defined. Now, get float extra, you have to specify a default value if this key is missing. So I'm just going to use a default value of 1.0 float. And then I'm going to do the same thing for resistance in ohms. And I'm making these 1 instead of 0 so I don't get divided by 0 errors. Actually, only ohms really needs to be 1. Shouldn't matter anyhow. So now I have floats and ohms. Let's go ahead and calculate amps and watts. And I could just look this up online, but I happen to know off the top of my head that it's volts over ohms. And watts is equal to volts times amps. So now I've calculated my values. Let's set the output. So in order to set the output, I need to get those two text boxes that I was writing to the output. So output amps and output watts. So I'm going to get a text view. And Alt plus enter. And then the same thing here for output watts. And now all I have to do is set the text here. So I'm just going to say output amps.set text. And now I need a piece of text here. So what I'm going to do is say amps plus A to start with. And then watts set text, watts plus W to start with. And then I'll tweak this a little bit in a second. So let's see if everything works at this point. Okay, so try 4.2 volts at 0.5 ohms. Okay, so this is not ideal. I need to change my layout and I need to center this. So let's go ahead and do that. So to make this top to bottom, I set my orientation to be vertical, and to center it, I set my gravity to be center. Let's try that. Okay, so almost, but I forgot to set, I should have set this orientation vertical inside my linear layout. So let's do that. Okay. There we go. Okay, so this text is a little small. I might want to set the text property to be bigger. And I'm going to say add some more to my output as well. So the text view, let's set the size of that, text size. And let's use large for that as well. Oh, did it put it at the top? Yeah, I put it at the top because I used that most recently. And let's make both of these large. Okay, and then in my code, I'm going to add okay. Let's see how we're doing now. Great. Okay, so now I don't like this part because that's just silly. So what I want to do is truncate this to 2 decimal places. I think that's reasonable. And in Java, the way you do that is by using a number format. And so I'm going to create a new number format, not number format exception, called, I'll just enter, called format. And then I put the format I want, which is number, point, number, number. And that should give me 2 decimal places. Okay, I actually wanted decimal format here, not number format. Sorry. Right, so number format was abstract because you have to give it a more specific subclass. So let's go ahead and import those. All right, now I have my decimal format. And here I'm going to say format toString format.format amps. And here I'm going to say format.format lots. And let's see if that worked. Great, so formatted to 2 decimal places or left without the 0. If I wanted to put a 0 there, I could, but that's a different format. So the only other thing that we could do is on the input activity, if you're running this app, Ohm's Law Calculator, make sure the back button works. So if I click calculate without filling in these values, I actually get a fatal error. So that's not a good thing. So what you really want to do is check to make sure that both boxes have something typed into them. And the way I'm going to do that is to check the length of these strings and see if either one of them is equal to 0. And if it's 0, then the user hasn't typed anything. Since these are restricted to numeric input, if they've typed anything, then it should be okay. So, except maybe if they just type a minus sign, I think that probably won't work, but we'll check that. So I'm going to say if volt string dot length is equal 0, then I'm going to do something. And I'm going to also do something if resistance string is 0. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use something called a toast. And a toast is a little floaty text box that pops up giving you an informational message. And so I'm going to say toast dot make text, and then I need a context, which is the activity it's going to appear in, which is this, and then I need a piece of text, and then let's see, what is the other argument? Let me show you something interesting here. So if I go to project settings and under editor, at the bottom here, there's show quick dock mode, quick dock on mouse move. And this is actually a useful setting, but it can also be annoying. So if I hover now over anything, I get the documentation for that thing. So what is that? It's so duration is how long to display the message, and I want length short or length long. So let's go for length short to start with. All right. So let's see what we get now. Now it's probably going to show the text, and then I want to return. So I kick out of the calculate event, and they have to fix the error and then click calculate again to run it. And then I'm going to do the same thing here if they haven't filled in the resistance. So this is going to be resistance string. Yes. And please enter a... And then I can also check to see if the resistance is equal to 0, which would be an error. So let's go ahead and also say if float.parse float of resistance string is equal 0.0 float, then let's go ahead and give the user a toast. Okay, so let's go ahead and see how it works with our error checking. So I'm just going to hit calculate, and I didn't get my toast here. Oh, I forgot to show my toast. Okay, I'm sorry. I have to add a show to this, and to here. So this only makes the text. This doesn't actually show the text. Now it does. Alrighty, so try it again. Okay, so calculate. Oh, okay, so please enter a voltage. Alright, 4.2. And I thought that duration was pretty good. Please enter a resistance. Yeah, worked for me. 0.5. Actually, let me just say 0. Resistance must be greater than 0. Okay, so 0.1. Great. And let's go back. And what happens if I just put a minus here and say 0.5? This might be 0. I'm not too... Okay, so I have an error here, so just typing minus is not going to work. And so let's also check string.length is equal to 1 and char at 0 is equal to dash. I'll just repeat this message. Alrighty. Okay, so let's try it now. Good. Okay, so that worked. Now I probably also could just type that and get a problem. Yeah, so this is not going to work either. Yeah, so that crashes the program. And also, if I were to type dash dots, I think that would crash the program. Yeah. All right, so 2 more things to check. It's dash dot dot dash. You see how I would go in and add the rest of those checks. I would also want to make sure that there are valid checks on the resistance string. So I'm going to try equals okay, and then do the same thing for resistance here. Okay, maybe not the most efficient because I'm doing the conversion in a couple of different places, but I think we're in good shape now. So let's go ahead and try it. So let's go dash dot dash dot 0. Okay, so that should work. And then dash dot... Oh, actually, I can specify negative resistance. That's not what I want here. Let me fix that. Less than or equal to 0. Okay. Resistance. Resistance must be greater than 0. Okay, so that works. Great. So I'm going to call this done. I don't think that there's any other way to break the program at this point. So for Lab 2, go ahead and do your own program. You can do a text manipulation. You could, for example, have the thing ask you for your first name and last name, and then have the output thing say, hello, Mark Goodman, by concatenating first name and second name. Or you could do your own kind of calculator. You could convert centigrade to Fahrenheit, or you could convert physics, or you could have something that calculates like the area of a rectangle, or whatever you want, whatever calculation you personally are interested in. Good luck.